I love being a fisherman because it gives me the opportunity to go out and roam around and apply my talents. We're hunter-gatherers still, and there's always the opportunity for the big hit, you know, the ability to go out and fill your boat and have a good catch. So I'm sending the boat on autopilot to make its way to that spot where we will set our rake in the water. I got started in fisheries kind of through the back door. Was intending to go to school and become a professional of some sort, and wasn't happy doing it. What made me happy was going back to what I did as a kid, which was fishing. Hey guys, we're coming up on our spot here. Let's get the crew. It's not a 9 to 5, it's really a lifestyle. It's not a job at all. I don't think I've had a job ever in my life. We came up to Stonington, Connecticut and engaged in the trawl fishery, inshore and offshore. But we kind of got into it at the end, at the tail end of the boom in ground fisheries. So unfortunately, as I got better at my trade, there was less and less fish to catch. But we felt at the time, the fisheries needed a break. It needed to have a little pressure taken off it. So we looked at the scallop business and got into it when it was very flat in the late 90s. It was more and more effort for less and less return. And it was generally a downward trend. It was a bleak outlook at that time.
It's a doomsday situation if we keep on the way we're going. The ground's getting worked so hard that they'll never come back.
The early 90s was a difficult time, certainly for scalloping. It was really depressed. I mean, about half of the scallop grounds in Georges Bank had been closed in 1994, so it was the most productive part of Georges Bank for scallops. If you look at the pictures of the catch on deck, it looked like bits and pieces of trash. It looked like Forrest Gump in that scene where he shows he doesn't catch any shrimp at all. It was sort of like that. A lot of boats were leaving the industry. I think some people went to Alaska to fish. It was just a hard time.
The scallop industry was really in the hole by the mid-90s. It was in bad shape.
It was a pretty desperate situation. Vessels were fishing all year long, not having much success. The resource was at the bottom.
One of the common problems is usually expressed as too many fishermen chasing too few fish. So you put too many fishermen and a low point in a cycle together, you have a bad situation. And the problem was there was no help, no research taking place to help the fishermen out of that. The solution was, let's limit the number of fishermen, let's limit the number of days being fished, and just keep cutting back the fishing effort.
And you base everything you tell us on what you really don't know. We're kind of told we got to do all this stuff, but nobody really knows anything. That doesn't make much sense.
And so it became pretty clear by the late 90s that something had to change, something had to happen.
And I just saw that, no, what we need to do is figure out a management regime that allows us to grow more scallops. There's an old adage that when times are good, research is important. When times are not so good, research is critical. And when times are bad, it's absolutely paramount. Well, I think the scallop industry early on recognized that good science is what you needed to make intelligent decisions, and that science did not exist. Scallop Research Set-Aside program was the first time that the fishing industry paid for its research in a formal program.
Fishermen were seeing in real time what's going on in the ocean, and that was contradicting what management was telling them. So they kind of got proactive, they got involved with science, supporting what they were seeing, and then bringing that to the managers and collaboratively making changes to the fisheries management process. The interesting thing about science and being involved in science is you don't always get the answer that you're looking for. So you have to be prepared. But if you find out the truth and what is going on, then you can make a better judgment at remedying those problems.
Initially, we set aside 1% of the catch. Currently, we're setting aside a 1.25 million pounds at current prices. That yields $12 million a year to conduct research. And the research is a broad area of surveys, protected species issues, habitat issues. There was this pool of funding available to conduct research and find solutions to these issues as they popped up.
So in a matter of less than 20 years, it went from pretty devastated to the most lucrative scallop fishery in the world.
For 20 years, I operated research vessels in the Atlantic and the Pacific, South Pacific, Alaska. And I developed survey gear, developed the scallop survey dredge, the clam survey dredge that's used by the National Marine Fisheries Service. So I really liked engineering and improving fishing gear design. And I retired after 20 years of active duty in 1989 and decided to become a farmer. Hence, I have a 20-acre organic farm here on Cape Cod, but I still do research. I personally believe that we need to have decentralized food production. So instead of going with large corporate farms or depending on large foreign factory fleets, we should have small-scale, localized food production, both farming, fishing, and aquaculture. The Coonamessett Farm Foundation was established in 2008, and it's a nonprofit research and educational institute that conducts research to support small-scale farmers, fishermen, aquaculturists, and renewable energy interests, if you will, small scale. Our mission is to try to make fishing and farmers successful, economically viable, sustainable. Technology is the key.
VIMS and the College of William & Mary, we were the first academic institution to establish a dedicated scallop research program. If you look at a fishing industry, it's something like the farming industry. A lot of independent operators. They had no place to go to find some of the answers to their problems. Where do these guys go to sort this stuff out? It's very, very difficult. Doing all right? Doing all right. Yeah, I've been going okay.
Had a great trip with Dave.
Yeah, I heard. And that's why we were very successful in putting forth both a research and extension program for the commercial fishing industry.
Area rotation is what's used in this region to manage scallops, and it is definitely, one of the main reasons that the fisheries come back with such success. So there's 3 main closures on Georges Bank that we use that way, and 3 in the mid-Atlantic off of the coast of New Jersey and Virginia.
We close those fields, if you will, until they're ready to harvest. And then we open up those fields and allow them to be harvested. So that rotational fishing strategy is very similar to a rotational farming strategy. It's basically open ocean ranching. It's morphing a wild capture fishery into a ranching operation.
Rotational management, for the most part, has been a great thing. There's times when we go into these closed areas and we can get an entire trip limit in 4 days, which is tremendous. Again, there's less fuel burn, there's less bottom time, less wear and tear on the boats, less carbon footprint. We can increase our landings, we can grow the population of scallops out here through attempting to mix in a little bit of an aquaculture mentality with our hunter-gatherer fisherman's mentality.
How's that toe? So the combination of the closures and then just cutting effort back, those two things together really brought the resource back pretty quickly.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good to see you.
Good. Y'all ready for your next trip?
I think I am.
Good.
For VIMS, kind of the core of what we've done with RSA has focused on resource assessment surveys. So I kind of view that as the core of the program, and we've been doing dredge-based surveys for probably ever since the RSA started in the late 90s.
And when we started the rotational fishing strategy, we realized we needed a lot more surveys, a lot more accurate stock assessments.
They were from the beginning, and they still are the cornerstone of the research set-aside program. And what they do is give us a very accurate picture of what is in a particular area so that we can set the catch limits.
It was known by everybody in the industry, most of the people probably in New Bedford, that there was a lot of scallops in these areas that had been closed. And after a long struggle, they got permits to go into the closed areas. And they worked with the Fishery Service, with the National Marine Fisheries Service, to do a survey. And they found, if you look at the pictures, it's almost like a carpet of scallops. They found this enormous number of scallops.
The National Marine Fisheries Service and UMass Dartmouth put together a survey using commercial fishing vessels. That's when Dr. Kevin Stokesbury came down from Canada to become part of the UMass Dartmouth team, developed the idea of using a drop camera to collect information. So what's the purpose of all this?
So what we're doing is going out and taking a quadrat sample of the sea floor and basically counting the number of scallops in it. So just like counting dandelions in your backyard.
Why are you counting scallops, though?
To try and get an independent estimate of the number of scallops on the sea floor, which then if we know their number and their size, then we can convert it to the biomass and see how many scallops, how much is out there.
When you have two independent surveys, if those surveys line up, you're a lot more confident in that information. And so it really reduces the amount of uncertainty. If you get those numbers wrong, it's a lot easier to overfish or underfish. So either people are losing money or you're fishing the resource too hard.
We have basically replicate surveys. So we have the government doing their dredge survey, and now they have a device we called the HabCam, which was developed using Scallop RSA funds by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and others.
HabCam is a habitat mapping camera system and designed to incorporate as much information about the seafloor and the water column as much as possible so we can learn about the environment and particularly habitat. Habitat is something that we really absolutely necessary to understand if we're going to be able to manage commercial fisheries in an intelligent way. This was essentially for development for NOAA and the National Marine Fisheries Service, which is tasked by the government to set the amount of scallops that can be taken out of the ocean. And so we can set what we call in fishery science the total allowable catch. We don't need to think in terms of hunter and gathering. We can manage a population such that we know explicitly how much is in a certain location. We can make these predictions and tell the fishing community, you know, look, go fish over here because we know there are lots of scallops and the yellowtail levels are low. But don't fish over here because we know there are lots of yellowtail.
Luckily, the Research Set-Aside program has worked on monitoring bycatch a little better, helping vessels to move from other higher bycatch regions.
Reducing bycatch is in fishermen's best interest for a lot of reasons. One is that some of the bycatch is what we call choke species. If we catch too much of it, certain management areas will close and we won't have access to them. And I believe that every fisherman has a moral conscious obligation to not impacting things that he doesn't need to. And most of the men I know are very able to do that. Avoiding bycatch helps us on deck as well. When we bring up a load, if it's pure scallops, we can shovel it. We don't have to bend over and sort it from the crabs and the fish and the skates and the other items that come aboard. I think we got more scallops up on that first tow. There are areas where it's unavoidable. We'll catch skates and rocks and crabs and things, and it's just part of the job. But the cleaner we can fish, the easier it is for the men.
Historically, the scallop dredge was a flatfish and scallop collecting gear. But with fish being scarce and scallops being valuable, it became less and less attractive to fishermen to want to catch fish. In fact, they would be better off not catching it.
There's been some gear solutions in helping to find ways for the fish to better escape out of the gear.
If we can't avoid them spatially and temporally, can we avoid catching them while we're there? And that's another line of investigation that VIMS has been involved with over the years in collaboration with Coonamessett Farms and others.
For the first time in the mid-90s, the research started to focus from a gear perspective on how to reduce flatfish bycatch. And we started, the top of the gear has a net panel we call a twine top. And so the first obvious solution was to increase the size of those meshes. So we started working with the scallop industry, looking at increasing ring size to control their harvest.
And that helped a great deal because the ring sizes kept those smaller scallops in the ocean longer. So the ring size, and coupled with the fewer days at sea and the access areas, has really provided industry with a lot of large scallops, the U10s, the U12s, the ones that are commanding a pretty large price.
You know, there were some pretty serious constraints potentially coming on the fishery due to sea turtle interactions a few years ago. There were concerns about interactions with loggerhead turtles in the scallop gear.
And some of the fishing captains said, you know, Ron, we're catching these sea turtles, and we've never seen sea turtles before in our gear.
That was a pretty traumatic experience. There was, all of a sudden, we were catching turtles, and we never did before. And some of the boats were getting 2 and 3 turtles a trip.
The fleet might have been interacting with 700 loggerhead turtles per year. And this is a threatened species.
It's a majestic animal. We don't want to see it injured or on our deck for any reason. So when it came to be a problem, the industry, the fleet set out to solve the problem.
So the first thing we had to do is figure out how to get the turtles from entering the dredge. And so the turtle chain, seemed like the most obvious answer. So we developed the spacing that was right for the turtles, and then we went and tested them at sea. and it worked.
After 3,000 tows, we had caught 7 turtles in the control dredges, the dredges without chains, and we caught no turtles in the dredges with chains. So those results were immediately brought to the attention of the New England Fisheries Management Council, and turtle chain regulations came into place.
Even before it became into a regulation, many of the dredges, many of the scallopers were putting turtle chains on their dredges so they wouldn't catch a sea turtle.
And by 2006, we were not catching turtles anymore. But there was some concern that even though they weren't being captured, they might have been injured on the seafloor.
So the next response was to modify the dredge frame itself. And it was modified to look more like a cow catcher on the front of an old locomotive.
We developed what is now known as the Sea Farm Turtle Excluder Dredge, which prevents, even while towing the gear on the bottom, it prevents the gear from running over the turtles or injuring the turtle. Now that we're not catching them, we need to understand we're still probably interacting with them underwater, but not harming them. But we need to understand if any changes are occurring. And so we started a major program looking at the behavior of loggerhead turtles. We're working with a population of what we call late-stage juveniles, which virtually nothing is known about these animals for the first 30 years of their lives. And this involved putting satellite tags on turtles and using a remote-operated vehicle to follow turtles to observe their behavior, where they were occurring in the water column, what they were doing. And we found that, in fact, they're eating scallops, they're eating hermit crabs, and they're eating lots of jellyfish, something that's very difficult to observe when you look at a stomach analysis. So we're learning a lot about their general behavior. And the other thing that's interesting is our satellite tags have temperature sensors and depth sensors. And we, when the turtle comes back up to the surface, it sends that data to the satellite, and we eventually get it. So by monitoring 10 to 20 turtles a year, we know if there's any major shifts in distribution or other parameters.
The more we can learn about turtles and what they do in their own environment, the better we're going to be avoiding turtles.
You know, once the scallop catch began to increase, the value of the catch in New Bedford increased with it. And New Bedford became the top port in terms of value of the catch in the United States, and one of the major fishing ports in the world. You could hear it. I live close to the docks. You could hear the activity. You know, there's a difference. You could hear the banging. You could hear people working on boats from, 6 or 7 blocks away. The noise increased on the docks. It was stunning to me. Melville says all the gardens and fancy houses in New Bedford are dredged up from the sea. It's still the same. It's probably $1 billion business in the city. And then tourism is a big deal because of fishing. People come here to look at the boats. It's sort of comforting or something. I don't know, but it's a big deal. It's a bigger deal than just the number.
We go up to the New Bedford auction to sell our scallops And depending on the size of the scallop, we have been enjoying very good and very stable prices in the past couple of years. The smaller range of our scallops usually bring between $9 and $11, and our larger scallops can bring $11 to $16, which is a phenomenal price.
Usually, you increase the supply, the price goes down, right? I mean, it's hard to sell, but in this case, it was the opposite. As the supply of scallops increased, the price went up. They were able to market it. So it wasn't the usual supply-demand story. It was basically a marketing story.
A dollar fish product comes in can multiply to anywhere to $3 to $5 of shoreside economic stimulus. And all of these jobs wouldn't exist if we didn't have healthy fisheries.
Well, New Bedford is the only port really on the East Coast that's left as a full-service port. So there's between 50 and 75, how you count, shoreside businesses.
Well, we have a repair shop here, Dockside Repairs, which my father started in 1977. They've been able to work with the researchers, try and develop new gear, new dredges. So it has been a new business for them. And because we try to protect the turtles, it created a whole new level of a business to build a different style of drag, which we're able to sell to different fishermen up and down the coast, because now it's mandatory to have them.
I fished for 25 years steady, and then another 5 years off and on. So that's like 30 years. I was always a tinkerer with stuff, you know, and I did try to improve stuff, and I came across certain things that I actually wanted to produce and sell. So I thought maybe it's a good thing that I could do, you know, something that could maybe make a future here. Well, we make nets, and we make scallop gear, and we sell all the components.
I started fishing when I was 13 years old, and I used to go out summers on my father's boat, and I loved how the gear worked. And as these changing regulations happened, and you had to change the gear to satisfy the regulations, that's where I started to really get a focus and interest and love of like, oh geez, you can change that net and you can accomplish this, you can change those rings and accomplish that. It does feel great to be involved in that sort of research, because you feel like you're doing something to bridge the gap between industry and the public, to let them know that we're not just going out and just taking from the ocean, that we actually care and we're actually cultivating the ocean to, you know, to take what we need today, saving product for tomorrow.
Let's go, just get them squeezed, get them squeezed. I ain't looking for perfection, just get them squeezed, they're brand new weights, they do have to be connected though.
Years ago, you know, the ocean was more like the wild, wild west. You know, there weren't a lot of rules, and it got us into some pretty dark places. And over the years, we've done a great job of rebuilding these fisheries, and I think that most fishermen really get it now. You know, they would less is more on a long-term standpoint. And the key word I would say is sustainability. They realize now that without a sustainable fishery in a healthy ocean, they're not going to be able to make a living like this.
The oceans are facing a lot of different stressors these days, overfishing being one of them, and impacts on habitat is another. And the Marine Stewardship Council program addresses both of those. The sea scallop fishery started their assessment process in March of 2010, and they completed it in December of 2013. They've put in many different monitoring programs in the fishery, and they fund a lot of research that focuses on gathering more information. And so at the end of the whole assessment process, they were fully certified and now able to use our eco-label in all of their products. As a consumer, voting with your dollars is a great way to make change. And so if you're concerned about any issue, whether it's overfishing or habitat loss or any issue really, you can always make those choices and try to drive things in the right direction.
With scallops, I think you can be pretty assured we're doing a good job with the sustainability of the species, and we're continuing to try to improve upon that. Are there things that we need to work on? Undoubtedly. There's things that every fishery needs to work on. We still have challenges with bycatch. We still have challenges of how to, kind of reduce our footprint on the important habitat. By all of my definitions, I think the sea scallop fishery is sustainable and on a sustainable track.
Technology allows us to manage in a more sustainable way. It allows us to conduct the research that we need to make the right decisions. It allows us to do the gear design work that we need to do to appropriately harvest the right size animals without causing any harm to other animals or environment. So I think the scallop fishery is a good example of a way to harvest a single species in a multi-species environment.
What keeps me going is the hope for tomorrow. We're always hopeful that tomorrow will be a better day, that our catches will be bigger, that management will be better. Fishermen are eternally optimistic. We have to be. It's one of the last places where you can take old technology and innovate it and keep refining it to do a better and better job. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves in, is always fishing a little cleaner, fishing a little better, having a higher catch rate. And all of that leads to a sustainable fishery. If we can execute our fishery without impacting the resource other than the removals that we expect, then we've done our job.